Hello, everyone. Welcome to the University of Maine Cooperative Extension's Savory Harvest Pies webinar. I'm Lisa Fishman, food and nutrition professional in Aroostook County, and we will be joined today by my UMaine food team colleagues, Kate McCarty, Enya Lindley, Lori Bowen, and Rob Dumas, our guest chef in the University of Maine, Dr. Matthew Hyland's pilot plant. I'd like to thank you for joining us for the second session of our 2021 cooking webinar series. This new series of cooking webinars is occurring twice a month, every other Tuesday. These webinars will deliver current research-based recommendations for healthy cooking using some of the great produce from Maine farms, tips for shopping local, and food projects that will keep you busy and engaged this winter. The mission of the University of Maine Cooperative Extension is to help Maine people improve their lives through an educational process that uses research-based knowledge focused on issues and needs. Our educational programs include agriculture, horticulture, including master gardeners, 4-H youth development, food safety, and of course, nutrition. And finally, we want to let you know that the University of Maine is prohibited from discriminating on the basis of color, race, national origin, sex, age, disability, and reprisal or retaliation for prior civil rights activities. Today, we'll focus on what we're calling savory harvest pies. These dishes are a great way to increase your use of local vegetables at this time of year, and they're delicious as an easy weeknight meal. First, some housekeeping. We have our webinar set up so that you can see and hear us, but we can't see and hear you. We want to answer your questions, so please ask them as they come up for you during our presentation by using the Q&A feature, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Thanks again for joining us. Now let's get started. So first up, what is a savory harvest pie? Well, it's a pie made up of meats and vegetables or eggs and cheese, so really an entree and definitely not a sweet dessert type of pie. It's a one-dish wonder. Think chicken pot pie, which had its origins in Greece and goes back to possibly 9500 BC. Or think of fish pies, popular along the coast of Canada and Maine and Europe. And they consist of ingredients such as clams, haddocks, salmon, mackerel, and shrimp. Then there are British delights like steak and Guinness pie or shepherd's pie made with lamb, or steak and kidney pie consisting of steak and, well, kidneys. The Franco-Americans enjoy tourtière pie, which is a pork, potato, and onion pie, and many people enjoy quiche, whether it's filled with egg and ham and spinach or loaded with veggies like mushrooms, peppers, and onions. Today, we want to emphasize pies that feature local Maine vegetables and grains. Savory harvest pies can be filled with all kinds of fillings, from root vegetables and greens to squash and other garden vegetables you may have frozen earlier in the year. The aim is to create a savory filling, one dish meal that is full of vegetables and tastes great at the same time. These recipes also provide protein through beans, dairy, and eggs, so you can serve with a side salad and have a great meal. Let's talk for a moment about crusts. Pies need crusts, but we're going to give you some ideas for alternatives to a traditional flour and butter crust. For instance, the bottom crust of your savory pie can be made from crushed nuts or crackers, mashed potatoes, or even other root vegetables that are mashed up. A nut crust can add textural interest as well as a toasted nutty flavor to the finished pie. You can use your favorite pie crust recipe and add a few tablespoons of chopped nuts, or use the recipe we'll send you today, which mixes flour, butter, and a full half cup of chopped nuts. You can use almonds, pecans, walnuts, pistachios. Really, any kind of nut can be used in a nut crust. We recommend you use chopped nuts, chopped by hand, rather than a nut meal or pulverized nuts from a food processor. This will retain that crunchy texture in the finished pie. If you're looking to make a gluten-free or low-carb crust, recipes abound for nut crusts that use a finely ground almond meal. But the nut crust we make is like a pie crust with flour and butter that has had chopped nuts added in. This means the nuts will toast up nicely while it bakes, thanks to the butter. It will be crunchy and add a toasty flavor to your savory harvest pies. Roll the crust out and you've got a great base for any savory pie, like our Dilly Carrot Pie pictured here. You can also use crushed up crackers and nuts to make a great crust. This crust is super simple because you just mix chopped nuts and crushed crackers with butter and press it into the bottom of your pie pan. This particular crust makes a great base for a savory cheesecake. Simply just ricotta, cream cheese, and eggs with pesto swirled throughout. It's a showstopper of a dish, plus it's easy to make. Using vegetables as your crust is just another way to add local vegetables to your meals this winter. You can use mashed potatoes or any combination of root vegetables, from parsnips and carrots to rutabagas and turnips. And while we said pies need crusts, you really could skip the crust for a crustless pie, using egg as the filling so that it will still slice up nice and firmly. We're going to go visit Kate now in the demo kitchen down in Cumberland County, and she's going to show us how to make a mashed root vegetable crust.
Great, thank you, Lisa. So yes, I'm going to show you how to make the root vegetable crust because I kind of shy away from making my own pie crust. I find them kind of finicky. Mine don't turn out as well as ones I have had from professional bakers, so I'm kind of discouraged. So there's nothing more simple than this root vegetable mashed crust that I'm about to show you. It's simply just mashed root vegetables pressed into a pie pan and then baked. And that picture that we just showed you is all the root vegetables that I used to make today's mash. So you can use any kind of root vegetable you want. There really isn't one that wouldn't work well. So parsnips, rutabagas, potatoes, sweet potatoes, the celeriac, turnip, carrots, Jerusalem artichokes. If you tuned into our webinar 2 weeks ago, you will recognize those vegetables because they are the same vegetables. Root vegetables hold up very well in the refrigerator, so they hung around for 2 weeks so they could be mashed into this crust. It was very convenient. So I simply just peeled them, cubed them, boiled them, and mashed them. So we'll switch to my demo cam here. You can see that I have the mash already done. So again, this was rutabagas, celeriac, Jerusalem artichokes. I think that's it. Oh, maybe a turnip. Okay, so I did the combination just because I wanted really not one particular flavor, kind of thinking one might be too strong. So I like the idea of mixing them all together. And again, peeled, cubed, boiled just until they're soft, and then mashed. And you also add in butter and salt and pepper. So it's really just to taste. And then I have a pie pan here that I will add the mash to. This is about, this is 2 cups of mash. So I had 2 cups of cubed veg and then just boiled and mashed. And now you're just pressing this into the pie plate with the back of a spoon, just trying to get it nice and even. And also so that it starts to go up the sides. And once you're happy with your arrangement, which really you could spend as much time as you want getting perfect, you bake it. So this is the blind bake step, which you will frequently see in recipes like a quiche, if you're using a pastry crust, where this will help to keep it just from being a soggy mess underneath of your filling. So it will take a little bit of extra time to plan for the blind bake to get your crust nice and crunchy, but it's worth it. Okay, so I got it evenly. Maybe it looks a little thin on camera, but trust me, it's even. Okay. And then you simply bake it. So you bake it at 375 for 45 minutes. Halfway through, you brush it with a little bit of olive oil, which is really going to help it crisp up and be nice and golden. And I have one that I baked ahead of time. So I've got the TV Magic with the raw one, goodbye, and the fresh one, or the baked one. And so you can see I used it's a deep dish pie pan, which I absolutely love, but maybe would, the little regular pie dish was better for this particular pie because you can see just the same amount of 2-cup mash it's a little thin, and so it got kind of crunchy and almost burnt. It's deeply browned on the edges, which I don't really like. So the size of your pie dish, of course, is going to affect how thick your mash is. So this particular recipe that we're going to send you this crust is paired with the mushroom sour cream filling. So ahead of time, I sauteed our mushrooms. Let me make sure I'm on the right camera here for you. I don't want you to miss any of the action. Good. Okay. So I sauteed these mushrooms, just sliced mushrooms in butter with shallots and thyme. And I'm going to mix them together into the sour cream, 1 egg, a little bit of cheddar cheese mixture here. So the mushrooms go in. And don't be deterred. If you're anything like me, you don't really like an involved recipe. So when you look at this recipe, as someone who doesn't really like too many involved projects, well, I do when the time is right, but not on a weeknight meal. This recipe really is simple. So stir your sauteed mushrooms into that sour cream mixture, and then that's your pie filling. I think there's also some salt and pepper in there at various stages. And then this will bake up into the pie crust. So we've got our pre-baked crust. The filling goes into that. And then you're gonna top it with a little bit of more shredded cheese. I'm using a cheddar, but it's very forgiving. You can use whatever you have. And a sprinkle of paprika, which will give it a nice little smoky, peppery flavor. All right, a little bit of cheese on top, a little bit of paprika for color and spice. And then this gets baked for half an hour at a 350-degree oven. So this is great. It's vegetarian. It's got plenty of protein in it. It's low carb if that's what you're into. And it's also just a unique take on the winter vegetables that abound. So this is our mushroom sour cream pie with the root vegetable crust, and you'll be getting this recipe. So now we're going to go over to Lisa to talk more about fillings.
And thank you, Kate. And that looks like the perfect brunch dish right there. Just looks warm and hearty and really welcoming for a lazy afternoon on the weekend. So savory harvest pies are a great way to use up odds and ends you may have in your refrigerator, from shredded chicken, mushrooms, cooked beans, to caramelized onions, peppers, any greens that may be starting to wilt in your refrigerator, and any cheeses you happen to have on hand. These ingredients will need a binder though, and most frequently we turn to eggs as that binder, especially when making quiche. Quiche is a great go-to savory harvest pie as it's so flexible. You can use whatever ingredients you have on hand, from meat and beans to vegetables and cheese, but just remember the ideal ratio of eggs to dairy to get that perfect creamy custardy filling that you are striving for. You want to use 1/2 cup of dairy for every egg. So if you want to use 3 eggs, you'll mix them with 1.5 cups of milk, cream, or half and half. Again, whatever you have on hand. Savory harvest pies are very forgiving. We also like to use the locally grown dry beans and legumes as a protein source. Locally grown dry beans include lots of options like kidney, yellow eye, soldier, and calico, to name a few. You can cook beans ahead of time and freeze them in pre-portioned amounts, like 1 cup or 2 cup portions, in freezer-grade containers to make your food prep easier. Once you've made your pie filling, you might opt for a top crust, and you have options here as well. You could do a traditional crust like a pot pie, or you can mix it up a little. Think mashed potatoes or other mashed root vegetables on top, like in a shepherd's pie, or a cornmeal top for a Tex-Mex themed pie like an enchilada pie or a chili pie. We're going to head over now to visit Rob, who's going to show us a special recipe of his that uses both legumes and a creative top crust, a vegetarian take on a shepherd's pie.
Good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining me in the Dr. Matthew Hyland's pilot plant here at UMaine in Orono. I'm Chef Rob Dumas, and I'm excited to share with you today a recipe that I've been making for several years. I worked in Vermont for about 4 years, and one of my jobs there was to feed the Vermont College of Fine Arts and their, I guess it was a liberal arts program, and they had a master's residency, and we got quite an interesting mix of students coming to that, and it was quite challenging sometimes to meet their dietary requirements and needs while also serving a fulfilling, hearty, satisfying meal. So one of the recipes that I came up with while I was working there at Dewey was to do a take on a shepherd's pie, but using a vegan or vegetarian approach. It can be vegan if you don't use butter and you used an alternative plant-based form of fat, but you know, I'm not vegan, so I don't mind using a little bit of butter in mine. But essentially this recipe is subbing out lentils for the ground beef. So you would start the recipe by taking a pot, putting into it a little bit of cooking fat, adding in minced onions and garlic, a little bit of tomato paste and bay leaf. To that you would add, I'm using green lentils, but I am reminded by this webinar that there are other forms of lentils that would lend themselves well to this, as well as the opportunity to use some locally grown legumes or beans, such as the yellow-eyed pea or the soldier bean or the marfax bean. Those would all work as a perfectly adequate substitute for a lentil prepared in this same technique. So again, we started by sauteing those onions, the garlic, the tomato paste, a little bit of bay leaf. What we're trying to do there is really develop some flavor in our filling. And you know, lentils have an earthy, rich flavor that can be kind of dominating. So developing those caramelized onion flavors, that garlic flavor, getting a little bit of that kind of woodsy or herbaceous bay leaf in there goes a long way towards making the filling taste more rich and more full. Once we add in our lentils, we're going to go ahead and add in about 4 cups of stock, and we're going to cook that until the lentils are fully cooked, but not turned into a mash, right? So you can still see that there is good lentil texture to this, very similar to like if you were busting up ground beef and stirring it in a pot, you'd be left with a nice texture to it, not totally smooth and homogeneous. So once the lentils are cooked, at that point I go ahead and I add in those classic shepherd's pie additions of corn, green beans, carrots, a little bit of peas, but I would encourage you to use what you have on hand, be willing to experiment. You know, if you don't have that bag of frozen mixed vegetables on hand, but you've got some, you know, leftover snap peas from your garden or something like that, feel free to incorporate those right in. So once those are added in, I'll bring that lentil mixture back to a simmer, and I'll season it at that point with a little bit of soy sauce. If you are hoping for this recipe to be gluten-free, you could use tamari rather than soy sauce. So the recipe fits a lot of dietary needs with a few minor modifications. But anyways, add in a little bit of that soy sauce, as well as adding in a little bit of balsamic vinegar or some other vinegar to add a bit of acidity. You know, you might have heard people talking about in cooking lately about balancing flavors, you know, and having salt, fat, acid, heat. And what you're looking to do there is really create a well-rounded flavor that has a lot of depth. And like I said with the lentils, they're very earthy. So taking that time to add a little bit of acidity and an extra pinch of salt right at the end. If you're not going for a vegan dish, a chunk of butter stirred into it goes a long ways. But what you're ultimately looking for is a creamy texture. You don't want it to be soupy wet, but you also don't want it to be dry, because this mixture is going to get topped with our roasted squash and then baked again. So you got to compensate a little bit ahead of time that you're going to lose a little bit of moisture in that second bake. Now, to change it up a little bit more and kind of take a little bit of a different take on this shepherd's pie, what I've taken is I've taken some butternut squash, you know, all about using what we have on hand here in Maine. I grow a lot of squash, and I'm always trying to come up with creative ways to eat it. Butternut squash this time of the year is so sweet. It's like candy. It's amazing after it's sat in storage for a little while, how sweet it can get. So very simple preparation. I take the squash, split them in half, scoop out the seeds, sprinkle salt, a little bit of oil, and then I put them back so that the cut side is down, and I roast them in a hot oven. And when I say a hot oven, I'm looking at like 400 to 450 degrees for about 45 minutes. And the goal there is that I'm going to end up with a kind of a charred exterior on the skin. And then when I let that cool down a little bit, I can just peel the skin right off, and I'm left with just usable squash meat, and I didn't have to do any peeling or any of that kind of stuff. So that's my favorite way to roast a squash. Once it's roasted, I put it into a bowl and I beat it either in a stand mixer or with a hand mixer to kind of break down the fibrous texture a little bit. I added in just like a tablespoon of maple syrup, a pinch of salt, and a little bit of butter. So this is our topping that we are going to put on top of our lentil filling. Now, sometimes it's nice to, gild the lily a little bit or get a little bit decorative or fancy. I like to serve this kind of shepherd's pie in an individual ramekin. This is also great as a meal prep thing. You can, prep these up, make them completely, pop them in your freezer, take them out, let them thaw out overnight, and then pop them in your oven for 30 minutes or so, and you've got a lovely, really easy dinner. Also great to make these up, if you're making it for dinner, but you want to have some leftovers to take for lunch one day, make up a couple extras, stick them in the fridge, and then you just take them right to work and heat them up right in the ramekin. So really convenient, easy way to do some meal prepping here with this recipe. But what we'll do is we'll take this ramekin, we'll take a couple of maybe 2 or 3 big spoonfuls of our lentil filling here, and we're going to just spread this out in the ramekin so that it's nice and even. And then to be a little bit fancy, I've got my butternut squash filling in a piping bag with a star tip. And the reason I like a star tip is it gives me ridges on my topping, and those ridges, when you bake this the second time, will get a little bit caramelized. The squash is full of sugar, so they'll actually get a little bit brown and almost crispy right on the edges, but you can see it's just beautiful to look at. So once I've got this in the dish, then I'll go from here, I'll put it right into a nice hot oven as well. The nice thing about this is everything's already cooked, so if you don't have a lot of time, you could eat it or serve it just like this. I think it elevates it a little bit to cook it in the oven just long enough for the top of this to get a little bit brown and crispy. And I've got one that I've just taken out of the oven here, and you can see the lightly charred edges on it. You can see the lentil filling kind of boiled and bubbled up around the edge a little bit. Really lovely. I like to serve it, on a plate so that my guest doesn't burn their hands. And yeah, bon appetit.
Thank you, Rob. That looks delicious. Before we go off and answer your questions, we do have a short video to show you of a crustless spinach pie. It's a super easy recipe and a great way to get more greens, whether fresh or previously frozen, into our diets. And we want to thank our FNEP colleagues for sharing this easy recipe with us. Now we have a chance to go to Lori, who's going to look at the questions that you all have asked.
Thanks, Lisa. We do have a question from Ruby, and this question is for Kate. Ruby would like to know, could you use fat-free Greek yogurt instead of sour cream in that recipe that you demonstrated?
Yes, most certainly. You can substitute in the Greek yogurt for sour cream in a 1-to-1 ratio in this recipe, definitely.
Thank you. I just want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and it looks like we're going to have time in a little bit to answer those questions for you. We don't have any questions just now, but we'll come back, and right now we'll go back to, oh, we just got a question. I'm gonna change the direction here real quick. It's from Francesca, and the question is, what are other binding agents you can use with root vegetables in addition to eggs and egg whites?
I'm thinking. Rob can jump in.
Cheese serves as a binding agent, correct?
Sure. Stick anything together with cheese.
Yeah, I would jump in and say you could use a little bit of flour combined with root vegetables to help create a sturdier crust. You could also use breadcrumbs or any kind of a starch will help in that capacity. If you're looking for a gluten-free solution, a little bit of cornstarch would be a reasonable option to help bind that root vegetable crust together a little bit tighter so that you get, you know, a nice firm texture in your finished product.
I should clarify, there are no eggs in the crust. So if the questioner was thinking that there are eggs in that root vegetable crust, there aren't. It's just butter. You know, you just make a mash, root veg mash, and it sticks together just fine on its own in the pan. But as far as the filling, maybe if you wanted to substitute other things for eggs, you can use those suggestions.
Thanks. Barbara wanted to know what the amounts of eggs, flour, and milk in the spinach pie were, and that will be in the resources. You can rewatch that video, and you'll receive that by email. Right. Sarah would like to know, do you have any vegan pie ideas? And I would say anybody could jump in on that.
I do have the spinach pie recipe in front of me too.
Oh, okay.
So I'll send the 4 recipes. It's this crustless kale or spinach pie, whatever greens you want. The dilly carrot pie with the nut crust, the mushroom sour cream pie with the root veg crust, and the savory pesto cheesecake, and then Rob's vegetarian lentil shepherd's pie. So it's two tablespoons of butter, 3 eggs, 1 cup of flour, 1 cup of milk, garlic, a teaspoon of baking powder, 1.5 cups of cheese, and 4 cups of greens. They really cook down, so it's going to give you a good dose there. So now, I'm sorry, vegan options, yes?
Yes.
I would jump in, Kate, and say that the recipe that I demonstrated today was vegan. You know, the only substitution that I made was using butter instead of olive oil. But there are also some plant-based margarine type things out there. I've seen avocado butter and things like that available from, I believe, Country Crock or something like that. So definitely an option. Easy to make a vegan pie. You know, if you sub that out for your butter or your in your pie crust. You can also just use vegetable shortening. Fillings, you'll have to get a little creative, but I think there's a wide world of options out there.
Yeah, there's also an egg substitute that's made from flax, so that could serve as the binder to really just to gel it, so you don't just have, you know, your ingredients in the crust.
I have another question from Audrey regarding that crust, so I'm gonna skip around here. Audrey would like to know what you did to the vegetable mash crust so that it's not soupy.
I guess the baking will really dry it out so that it holds up. So I didn't find it to be soupy at any point. So I, drained my vegetables well after boiling them, mashed them up with 2 tablespoons, so 2 cups of vegetables and 2 tablespoons of butter. So not an excess of fat there. And then you bake it for 45 minutes at a 375-degree oven. So it is gonna shrink up, and a lot of that moisture is going to evaporate. So I'd say probably just make sure it's thoroughly baked to give you something that slices nicely and adheres to your pie as you're cutting it.
Okay, awesome. And also about the pie, Lydia would like to know, do you recommend buttering the dish before adding the root vegetable crust?
Lots of recipes suggest that you do butter the pie pan, so I was surprised that you don't need to in this one. But I think with the addition of the butter and then the additional oil that you brush on during the baking, that it's already got plenty of fat in it, so it doesn't stick to the pan.
Great. And again, it's best to cook most root vegetables before assembling the pie. Is that correct?
Definitely for the crust. The filling, I would say probably as well, that they would benefit from having a little parboil, because they can take so long to bake that you might overcook some of your other ingredients, especially if you're doing a quiche. You don't want to have like a raw potato in the middle, or you don't want to have overcooked egg to get your potatoes baked. So they can benefit from a parboil. Your ingredients don't need to be fully cooked before they go in, but about halfway cooked, let's say, to give you a final product that's high quality.
Good. These recipes are getting a great response here. We have a request. Is there a place to find more recipes like this?
We do have a recipe depot on our website. And I can send that. I've sent it in past webinars, but I can send just the main page to our recipe website. That's the one we recommend. I did try and pull out all the ones that were the creative savory pies. There's also a taco pie. Lisa's going to go over the resources. So.
Okay. So we have a question for Rob. Rob, you used butternut squash for your shepherd pie topping. Is pumpkin a pretty even substitute for that? Susie grew up with sugar pumpkins and butternut squash, and they have an abundant crop of both.
Yes, absolutely. Any of your, I guess, culinary squashes could be used in place of the butternut squash. My personal favorite is kabocha, or the Japanese pumpkins. Those sugar pumpkins work really well as well. You will find that the cooking time is a little bit faster for the pumpkins because they have a much larger cavity, so they get cooked probably in about 20-25 minutes in a hot oven rather than the 40 or 45 for a butternut.
And we have a comment here. Somebody in favor of the pies with the potato and onion pie was a favorite of my parents-in-law of French background. It is simply leftover mashed potato, half a cup of finely chopped raw onion, salt, pepper to taste, all in a 2-crust pie plate. It's a nice lunch with a green salad. So we thank Joni for that. And it looks like we have answered all the questions for now. So we can go on back to Lisa.
Thank you, Lori. So here are the recipes that we're talking about today, and you'll receive all of these in a follow-up email, and that's for the savory harvest pie recipes today. There was this crustless spinach pie video. The recipe will be coming to you. We have a taco pie recipe coming to you, as well as a vegetarian shepherd's pie that is also part of our mix. We'll also be sending along the University of Maine agriculture colleagues have come up with a great interactive directory of where you can find Maine farm products. You can shop directly at the farms yourself by using this map. Be sure to visit the websites from the individual farms or call ahead so that you can learn about how their policies may have changed during COVID. We will be back in 2 weeks on February 9th to discuss cooking with an electric pressure cooker, which is also known as an Instant Pot. Other topics that we'll be talking about during our series will include reducing food waste in your kitchen, which is coming up on February 23rd. And then we'll slip into the month of March and we'll be talking about using frozen fruits in baking and preserving. We want to start getting you ready for the upcoming preservation season. And in order to be able to store all of the great things you're going to put up this year, you first need to empty out what's currently in your freezer and also down in your pantry, in your root cellar. We'll be talking about another webinar using up some of your canned goods that you have put up over the past year. So we want to definitely clean out before we start restocking. Rotate that inventory. We'll be sure to share all of our resources and recipes from today's topic, as well as registration for any of our upcoming webinars. We'll be sending that to you in your email. And just one last check to make sure we don't have any questions lined up for us in our box, Lori?
We don't have any, but I bet next time the Instant Pot is going to create a lot of questions. I think people are really going to enjoy that. I'm looking forward to it. But we don't have any questions for now.
Well, I do have a question I wanted to toss out to either Kate or Rob. If I were to be pulling some frozen greens to be using in any of these pies, do you recommend that I defrost them first and drain them or squeeze them? How dry do my greens need to be if I'm taking them out of my freezer?
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I would recommend that you would drain them and try and squeeze any moisture out, because I think if there's one thing that kind of the enemy of these harvest pies is excess moisture. You know, certainly like when you bake a dessert pie, you don't want to slice into it and have take the first slice out and have all the filling ooze out into its place. So if you can get those greens nice and thawed and dried, and then probably you're going to be cooking up some other ingredient, whether you're sauteing an onion or something, so you could put those greens in there, mix it all your veggie filling together before you put it in the crust.
And I do have another question, if I could ask, and that is, does it make any difference whether you use full fat dairy or a reduced fat or a fat-free dairy product in any of these pies?
I did see something go by about substituting when I was looking, just to confirm you could substitute in that yogurt for sour cream. That sometimes the low fat stuff will have additional stabilizers and thickeners added to it. So that could potentially mess with your recipe. I myself prefer the full fat version, but I don't know that that's the university's position.
I think everybody wants to know what we personally would cook, so I think it's good. I don't have any more questions. Lori, do we have any more questions in the box?
I'm afraid we don't. No more questions.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and we hope you're staying happy and healthy, and we look forward to seeing you for our next webinar in 2 weeks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.